Hey, my name is Jocelyn Barrett. I'm 24 years old, and this is my story. It might sound unbelievable at first, like something out of a conspiracy thriller, but every single word you're about to hear is true. What started as small, strange glitches in my bank account ended up unraveling a shocking betrayal that came from the last people I ever expected to hurt me. I never thought my own parents would secretly spy on me, dig into my privacy, and control my financial life behind my back. But they did, and once I found out, everything changed. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story is reaching. And if you're still with me, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss stories of truth, courage, and transformation after betrayal. It all began during my final year at Indiana University, right here in Bloomington. I was pursuing a double major in finance and marketing, living off campus in a small apartment near the Kirkwood Avenue Strip. I worked hard, juggled 2 part-time jobs, and prided myself on being independent. My parents, Deborah and Thomas Barrett, were what most people would call traditional. They raised me with strong values, structured routines, and a deep sense of responsibility. But behind their smiles and "we just want what's best for you" attitude, there was a constant need for control, especially over me. Even in college, they expected weekly check-ins, constant updates on my grades, my spending, my friends, and my plans. At first, I thought it was just love mixed with a little overprotectiveness. But looking back now, the signs were all there. The way my dad insisted on helping set up my laptop to protect me from viruses. The way my mom always seemed to know when I went over budget, even though I had my own bank account, with no shared access. At the time, I brushed it off as coincidence or maybe intuition. But things started getting weirder. One night, I was up late working on a group project for a marketing class. I was logged into my bank app, budgeting for groceries and rent, when I noticed a strange withdrawal. $78.33 spent at a store I had never been to. It was labeled Ridgeway Market, a place on the outskirts of town. I thought it might be fraud. I locked my card and reported it, but the bank didn't find any red flags. A week later, another small amount vanished. Then another. Over the next month, I watched as bits of money started disappearing, always under the radar. Never enough to trigger fraud alerts, but enough to drain me slowly. My savings, the one thing I'd worked so hard to build, was shrinking like water leaking through a crack in the wall. I tried to change my passwords, called my bank, and even bought antivirus software. But no matter what I did, the withdrawals kept happening. Then came the emails. At first, they looked like phishing scams, generic warnings about suspicious activity, but some had personal details only someone close to me could know. One email mentioned a payment I made on Venmo to my friend Kayla, with a private note attached. Another referenced the exact time I submitted a paper for my finance class. That's when I felt it, that tightening in my chest, the creeping anxiety. Someone wasn't just accessing my account, they were watching me. I began to withdraw from my routine. I started skipping parties, canceling plans, locking every device with complicated passcodes. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was looking through my digital life, step by step. I became paranoid. I stopped using my laptop in public. I deleted apps. I even stopped journaling, afraid someone might read what I wrote. My friends noticed, especially Kayla, who'd been my roommate since freshman year. "You haven't been yourself lately," she said one night, sitting on the couch in her pajamas. "It's like you're waiting for something bad to happen." And she was right. I was. Then, one night, while doing a clean install on my laptop, something I never thought I'd be doing at midnight on a Friday, I found it. It was buried deep in the system files, disguised as a legitimate program, but it wasn't. It was a remote access tool, giving someone the ability to view my screen, log my keystrokes, access my webcam, and more. I froze. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or laugh in disbelief. It was real. Someone had been spying on me. I took it to the university's IT help desk the next morning. A kind graduate student named Neil helped me analyze the logs. What he found made my blood run cold. "The software is sending regular reports to a static IP address," he said. "It's not bouncing around like a hacker would do. It's coming from a home connection. Looks like a residential IP registered in Fishers. Fishers. That's where my parents lived. I don't remember much of what I said after that. My vision blurred, my ears rang, and all I could feel was a wave of betrayal washing over me like icy water. For days I didn't confront them. I couldn't. I walked through my life in a daze, dragging myself through classes, pretending everything was normal. But inside, something had snapped. I started gathering evidence. I kept the spyware logs. I asked Neil to help me trace every data report. I pulled my bank statements and documented every suspicious withdrawal. It wasn't just a few dollars here and there. They had been siphoning money from my account for months. Thousands of dollars. My parents had been using my own devices to monitor me and take my money under the guise of keeping me safe. But safe from what? That question haunted me. Then, 3 weeks later, I drove home. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, the kind that usually made the drive from Bloomington to Fishers feel relaxing. But this time, my hands clenched the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When I walked through the door, my mom greeted me with her usual bright smile. "Jocelyn, we didn't know you were coming." I looked at her, that familiar face that raised me, fed me, comforted me after breakups. And all I could feel was 1,000 questions boiling under my skin. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice flat. My dad was in the living room reading the newspaper. He looked up and smiled too, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. And that's when I knew. They thought they'd never get caught. They thought I'd stay the obedient daughter forever. But they were wrong. My father didn't even bother to lower the newspaper as I stood there, a storm building behind my eyes. I took a breath and sat on the edge of the couch, facing both of them. My mom followed me in from the hallway, sensing something wasn't right. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, tilting her head in that concerned mother way that used to bring me comfort. But not this time. Not anymore. "I know about the spyware," I said. The room fell into a silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. My mom blinked, confused. My dad finally folded his newspaper, setting it aside like this was a conversation about missing car keys. "What spyware?" he asked, his tone measured but cautious. "You know what I'm talking about," I said. "The one installed on my laptop. The one that's been logging my activity, capturing screenshots, and sending them back to this house. Don't lie to me." My mom looked toward him, her expression morphing from confusion to horror, then shame. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned forward with a calmness that chilled me. "We did it for your own good, Jocelyn." That sentence. I will never forget the audacity of it. The way he said it with no remorse, as if it were some gift they gave me. Like privacy, trust, and financial autonomy weren't part of the deal when I became an adult. "Your own good," I repeated, my voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You've been watching me like I'm a criminal. You've been stealing from me. How is that for my good?" "It wasn't stealing," my mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We wanted to make sure you didn't do anything irresponsible. You were moving too fast, too independent. You were shutting us out." That's when I understood. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about power. They couldn't handle the fact that I had carved out a life on my own terms, that I had built something without needing them. So they pulled me back the only way they knew how, by invading the one space they couldn't physically control, my digital world. I stood up. "I'm leaving," I said. "And I don't know when, or if, I'll come back." My mom started crying. My dad just looked away as if he knew the damage had already been done. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. I just left. But that day, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I had become someone they feared losing control over. And they should have been afraid. Because from that moment forward, I vowed to take back every piece of my life they'd tried to claim. Back in Bloomington, I went into action mode. I contacted a cybersecurity firm, sent them all the logs Neil helped me recover, and paid for a deep forensic report out of my remaining savings. The results came back in 4 days. The spyware had been active for almost 9 months. It had access to every password, email, photo, and document I had touched since the beginning of the year. I felt sick, not just because of the invasion, but because they had the audacity to disguise it as love. I reported the incident to the police. They were hesitant at first. Family cases always were. But once I provided the full forensic report, things changed. A detective named Ramos took the case seriously. He even brought in a tech specialist to verify the findings. It was the first time I felt someone in authority actually saw me as a victim, not just a rebellious daughter. Meanwhile, I reached out to my bank again, this time with the full report. They launched an internal investigation. Days turned into weeks. I kept going to classes, showing up to work at the coffee shop, smiling at customers like my life wasn't unraveling behind the scenes. But inside, I was exhausted. The betrayal ran deeper than code and money. It had shaken the very foundation of what I believed family was supposed to be. I stopped answering their calls. My voicemail filled up with messages from my mom, some tearful, some angry. My dad only called once. He left a short message. I did what I thought was right. You'll understand one day. But I didn't want to understand. Then came the breaking point. One night, after closing up the shop, I stopped by Kayla's apartment. She was sitting cross-legged on her couch, sipping tea, surrounded by art supplies and the kind of cozy chaos that always made her place feel like home. I feel like they stole my future, I told her, tears finally spilling down my cheeks for the first time since everything happened. Not just the money, the trust, my sense of safety. She pulled me into a hug and said something that stuck with me. Then take it back, Jocelyn, piece by piece. That night, I made a list. A real physical list on paper. I titled it, Take Back My Life. Item 1. Reclaim my financial autonomy. I opened a new bank account at a different institution and locked it down with 2FA, biometric security, and zero access to anyone but me. Item 2. Replace all my electronics. I wiped my phone, replaced my laptop, and bought a refurbished tablet. No connections to anything old. Item 3. Pursue legal action. I met with a lawyer the next week, explained everything, and filed for a restraining order. Not for physical abuse, but for digital stalking and financial control. It was risky, controversial, and emotionally exhausting, but it was mine. Through it all, I leaned on Kayla, Neil, and a small circle of friends who never judged me. They became my new family, one built on respect, not manipulation. I began journaling again, this time on paper, locked in a drawer, safe from prying eyes. I even started writing an essay for class about the illusion of digital freedom and how trust can be weaponized. It got the highest grade I'd ever received. Detective Ramos called me a month later. We've reviewed the forensic data. Your father's IP address matches over 90% of the spyware reports. We're preparing to issue a warrant. I sat in silence, processing the weight of that moment. Justice was coming, not just for the money they took, but for every sleepless night, every panic attack, every time I doubted my own instincts. But this wasn't the end, not even close. Because while the legal system might bring closure, I had a different plan in motion. Something far more personal. Revenge. Not the violent kind. Not the cinematic explosion of fury people imagine. Mine would be meticulous, psychological, quiet, the kind of revenge that doesn't break the law, but breaks expectations. The kind that makes them realize they never really knew who I was or what I was capable of, and I was just getting started. The day the arrest warrant was issued, I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. I thought maybe I'd sleep better. Maybe my hands would stop shaking whenever I checked my bank account or opened my laptop. But instead, I felt a new weight settle on my shoulders. A weight that came with the knowledge that this was no longer just a family secret. It was a matter of public record. And even if they didn't go to jail, the stain of what they had done would follow them. But something else had shifted too. Something inside me. I had spent my whole life following their rules, dancing on the tightrope they strung for me, thinking that obedience equaled love, that if I disappointed them, I had failed. But the moment I realized they were capable of violating me in such a calculated way, something in me cracked open. I started seeing everything in a different light. Not just their actions, but their intentions, their patterns, their need to control every inch of my life. I was done playing the part they wrote for me. And so, I began writing my own. The legal proceedings were slow. My lawyer, Megan O'Connell, was a brilliant woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a calm, composed presence. She was the first person who looked me in the eye and said, "This is serious. And you're not overreacting. With her help, we pressed charges for unauthorized access to personal data, financial manipulation, and cyberstalking. Indiana's laws weren't perfect, but they were strong enough to get a hearing in front of a judge. Meanwhile, Detective Ramos coordinated with the local DA to move the case forward. I stayed mostly quiet during the process. I let the facts speak: the forensic report, the digital logs, the withdrawals, the screenshots, the emails. But I wasn't just sitting back. I was working on something else, something more personal. In one of my marketing seminars, we had to create a capstone project that centered on a real-world problem. Most of my classmates picked standard topics: declining engagement on social media, brand trust recovery, influencer fatigue. I chose digital surveillance in families, specifically how parental control can morph into psychological abuse. At first, my professor raised an eyebrow, but once I showed her the outline, she approved it without hesitation, and so I poured every ounce of pain, betrayal, and fire into that project. I used my story, but anonymized it. I gathered real stats, quoted digital rights experts, and built a campaign for awareness. Invisible chains: when family becomes the warden. It caught fire on campus. I gave a presentation at the Student Tech Ethics Conference in Indianapolis. Then I got an email from a journalist with the Indiana Tribune asking for an interview. I almost said no, but then I thought, why not? Why keep protecting the people who didn't protect me? I gave her the story, anonymously. She respected that. The piece was published under the title, "Parental Surveillance: When Love Crosses the Line." It went viral. I saw it shared on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit. Students, parents, even tech bloggers started debating it. I read the comments in silence, some supportive, others vicious. But I didn't care, because I knew the truth. And soon, so would everyone else. The real shift came when I got an email from a local podcast host named Darren Blake. He ran a show called Digital Disrupted, and he wanted to dedicate a full episode to my experience. Still anonymous. I agreed. Sitting in the recording studio, surrounded by soundproof foam and a microphone, I told the world everything. Every detail, every feeling, every tear I held back. That episode exploded. Within a week, I got messages from girls across the country, college students, high schoolers, even a few young professionals. They told me their stories, how their parents tracked them, stole their passwords, withheld money, installed cameras in their rooms. Some cried in their voice notes. Some raged. Some whispered like they were still afraid someone might hear. I listened to them all, and something changed in me again. I wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, I could turn my story into something bigger than revenge. But that didn't mean I'd stopped planning it. By then, my father had been served. My mother cried in court. They pleaded not guilty, of course. Claimed it was all a misunderstanding. Just a protective act gone too far, their lawyer said. But the judge wasn't impressed. The evidence was overwhelming. Ramos's team even found that they used the money taken from my account to pay off credit card debt and buy my younger brother Ethan a used car. The same brother who always got away with everything, who was never questioned, who walked around with the smugness of someone who never had to earn a thing. That hurt worse than the spyware. That money was supposed to be for my move to Chicago after graduation. My dream was to work at a financial firm downtown, get an apartment with big windows and a view of the skyline. They didn't just steal my money, they stole my momentum, but I was taking it back. I started a YouTube channel, just a small one, no face, just voiceovers and graphics. My first video was titled, "How I Discovered My Laptop Was Spying on Me and What I Did Next." It wasn't flashy, it wasn't edited by a pro, but it was real. It hit 100,000 views in 3 days. People flooded the comments. Some shared their own experiences. Some begged for advice. Some were shocked. Some called me a liar. But again, I didn't care. Because for every hater, there was someone who needed to hear my story. Someone who needed to know they weren't crazy. That this happens. That it's real. And with each message, each new subscriber, each DM from a girl like me, I felt stronger. I kept going. I posted guides on digital safety, on how to recognize spyware, On legal rights and boundaries, I hosted a live stream Q&A. I brought on Neil, who became a quiet, brilliant co-host, helping me break down technical jargon for everyday people. My subscribers passed 250K in 2 months. I got my first sponsorship deal. Suddenly, I wasn't just recovering, I was building something. Meanwhile, the court date approached. My parents didn't contact me again after the arraignment. Not a call, not a letter, just silence. Ethan sent me a text that said, "Thanks for ruining everything." I blocked him, but I wasn't done yet. One night, while editing a video, I got a message on Instagram from a girl named Maya in New York. She said she was 19 and her dad had installed hidden apps on her phone. She said no one believed her, that she felt like she was losing her mind. I wrote back one sentence, "You're not crazy. I believe you." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a movement. But before I could fully step into that role, I had one more thing to do: face them. Not in court, not through lawyers, in person. It was a rainy afternoon when I drove back to Fisher's for the last time. I hadn't been there since the confrontation months ago, and now that the court case was underway, I had every reason to avoid it completely. But something in me needed closure. Not the legal kind, the personal kind. I needed to see them. Not to ask why, not to hear apologies I knew would never come, but to make peace with myself and everything they no longer had power over. I wore a gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. Nothing dramatic. I didn't want this to feel like a performance. I parked a few houses down and walked the familiar sidewalk, the cold air slicing through my sleeves as wind rushed between the trees. The house looked exactly the same, but I didn't feel the same. I didn't even hesitate as I walked up the steps and rang the bell. My father opened the door. For a moment, he just stared. I could see in his eyes that he thought I was there to forgive him, or maybe to drop the charges, or finally say he was right. But I wasn't. I didn't come back for him. "I don't need anything from you," I said before he could speak. "I'm not here to fix things. I'm not here to understand. I just needed to see your face and feel absolutely nothing." He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "No, you don't get to speak. You had your chance. For months. For years, even. You watched me fall apart. You watched me question my sanity. You watched me struggle just to breathe without ever reaching out your hand. Not unless it was to grab something from me." My voice didn't shake. Not this time. My spine felt made of iron. My chest was steady. My mother appeared behind him, her face pale, eyes puffy like she hadn't slept in days. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of their choices had finally started pressing down on her. "Jocelyn," she whispered, "please, come inside." "No," I interrupted. "I'm not your daughter anymore. At least not in the way you've defined it. You don't get to call me that when you were the ones who tried to trap me, to monitor me like a possession. A daughter is someone you nurture, protect, and trust. You did none of that." I turned to go, and for a split second I heard my father mutter, "You'll regret this one day." I stopped. I turned back to him with a calm I didn't even know I had. "No, you will." And I left. Back in Bloomington, I felt like I'd just exhaled after holding my breath for a year. The confrontation didn't solve everything, but it gave me back a part of myself I hadn't realized I was missing. My voice. My ability to look someone in the eye and declare my own worth, regardless of how they tried to redefine it. From that point forward, things accelerated. My channel surpassed 500,000 subscribers. I was invited to speak at the Midwest Digital Freedom Summit. I partnered with advocacy groups focused on digital privacy and safe tech use for teens and young adults. I even helped Maya, the girl from New York, connect with a legal resource center, and her father was issued a cease and desist order within weeks. I started working part-time with a startup that built anti-surveillance software, helping them shape their user interface and marketing strategies. I wasn't just healing, I was transforming. Every sleepless night, every dollar stolen, every email tracked had now become fuel, a fire that pushed me forward. But not everything was easy. There were days I woke up and still questioned myself. There were moments when I'd reread old texts from my mom, trying to find a sliver of warmth that didn't feel poisoned by betrayal. Trauma doesn't evaporate. It lingers like a shadow. But the difference now was that I didn't fear it. I faced it. I invited it to sit beside me while I worked, while I built, while I dreamed. Neil became more than just my tech ally. We grew closer, late nights turning into long conversations, brainstorming sessions into laughter. He never tried to fix me. He just stood beside me. He respected my boundaries, never pressured me to open up more than I wanted to. And I realized one night, somewhere between a half-eaten pizza and a bug test, that trust wasn't just about who could hurt you. It was about who chooses not to. Meanwhile, the court date approached. My parents' defense strategy had crumbled. Their lawyer tried to argue that it was all a parental misstep, but the evidence was undeniable. My bank records, the spyware logs, the testimony from Neil and the cybersecurity firm, even emails they'd forgotten to delete from their own devices, recovered by law enforcement, showed exactly how intentional and long-running the surveillance had been. I didn't even have to speak during most of the hearing, but I did anyway. When given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement, I walked to the front of the courtroom in a navy blue blazer and simple black slacks. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I told the truth. My name is Jocelyn Barrett. I'm 24 years old. I've worked since I was 16. I paid for my own education. I built my life with my own hands. And yet, the people who raised me, the people who claimed to love me, used my trust as a weapon. They didn't just violate my privacy, they robbed me of peace, of safety, of sleep, and they did it while pretending they were helping. I paused, looked directly at them. They broke something sacred, and that can never be undone. But I'm here, and I'm stronger than ever. And no matter what the outcome is today, I've already taken back what matters most, my future. The room was quiet. Even the judge looked moved. The final ruling came 2 weeks later. They were sentenced to probation, mandatory digital ethics training, and ordered to pay restitution for every dollar taken from my accounts. It wasn't jail time. It wasn't headline-making justice. But it was something, and more importantly, it was public record. Everyone in their social circle knew. Their church, their neighbors, their friends, the ones who used to praise them for raising such a disciplined, brilliant daughter. They all knew now what lay beneath the surface. And they were never going to escape that shadow. I moved to Chicago that summer. I got that apartment with the big windows, just like I always dreamed. The city welcomed me like a breath of fresh air. No more secrets, no more surveillance. Just a girl with a laptop, a voice, and a mission. I launched a nonprofit organization called Signal Safe, focused on providing resources for young adults who've experienced digital abuse from within their own homes. I partnered with schools, universities, and online platforms to build awareness and provide access to cybersecurity education. Maya became one of our first volunteers. Neil joined as our CTO. And me? I finally started to sleep again. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had nothing left to hide from, nothing left to fear. My past was no longer a wound. It was a scar. And every scar tells a story. This one just happened to be mine. I thought the courtroom would be the end. That standing in front of my parents, making my voice heard, and hearing the judge's ruling would close the chapter for good. But trauma doesn't operate on court dates. And justice, no matter how satisfying it might feel in a legal sense, isn't always enough to settle what's been broken inside you. The truth is, I still woke up some nights hearing the click of invisible keys, still wondered if every email I sent or transaction I made was truly private. That's what violation does. It echoes. But there's a difference between being haunted and being controlled. And I had decided I would never let them control me again. One evening, I was sitting by the window in my new apartment in Chicago. The sun was setting behind the skyline, pouring golden light across my desk, my plants, and the open journal in front of me. The city felt like mine now. Not because I owned it, but because I had earned every single piece of it. Every hour spent in therapy, every late-night video edit, every outreach email sent through my nonprofit. It all led me here. Still, that day, something was gnawing at me. The story wasn't over. Not for them. Not for the people who still hadn't paid. Not with money, but with understanding. They still didn't grasp what they had done. In every interview, every public comment they They continued to frame themselves as overbearing but well-meaning parents. "We just cared too much," my mother had said in a local news article. "We never meant to hurt her. We were trying to protect her from the dangers of the world." As if I had been the one corrupted. As if I had turned into a stranger and left them no choice. The story being told was incomplete. Worse, it was misleading. And I realized that letting that narrative continue unchecked was its own kind of surrender. So I decided to change that. My YouTube channel had crossed 800,000 subscribers by then. I had a loyal audience, many of whom had been with me since the beginning. They knew my voice, they trusted me, and they deserved to know the full story, names included. For months, I had shielded my parents' identities, not to protect them, but to protect myself from the backlash, from the legal complexities. But I was no longer that scared girl trembling in front of her laptop. I had learned the law. I had earned my place. And the truth, real truth, is always a defense. I planned the video carefully. It wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, it was honest. The title was simple. My parents spied on me, stole my money, and lied about it. Here's what really happened. The thumbnail was a still shot of me looking into the camera, expression neutral, background dim but warm. No theatrics, no bait. I filmed it in one sitting. "Hi, my name is Jocelyn Barrett. Some of you already know my story, but today I'm going to tell you everything, from the beginning, without filters, and without hiding names." I told them about Bloomington, about my laptop, about the spyware, about the withdrawals, the tracking, the betrayal, about standing in court while my parents twisted the truth in an attempt to save their image. I included everything. The video was an hour long. It reached 1 million views in 2 days. And then, the real storm hit. I started getting emails from journalists, again, this time from national outlets, Newsweek, The Washington Post. A producer from a documentary series emailed me asking if I'd consider letting them use my story as a feature. Even Netflix wanted to talk. At first, it overwhelmed me. But then, something strange happened. The public turned, not just against my parents, but in solidarity with me. Thousands of comments flooded in, people thanking me, people opening up about their own parents who had crossed boundaries. Therapists and lawyers started citing the video as a resource in digital abuse cases. It wasn't just a personal reckoning anymore. It was a cultural one. And that was when I knew I hadn't just survived what they did to me. I had reversed it. I had taken their attempt to control me and turned it into a megaphone that amplified not just my voice, but the voices of thousands of others who had been too afraid, too ashamed, or too invisible to speak. But the fallout for my parents? It was just beginning. Their community in Fishers, once supportive, began to shift. Friends distanced themselves. Their church asked them to step down from leadership roles. My father's position at the local insurance firm? Suspended pending internal ethical review. My mother's volunteer work at the neighborhood school ended quietly. No one needed to say why. For people like them, image was everything, and I had shattered it with nothing but truth. But it wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't sought to humiliate them. I had simply held up a mirror and let them see who they truly were, publicly, without makeup or excuses. And they hated it. One day, a package arrived at my new apartment. No return address. Inside was a box with a small photo album, a childhood one. Pictures of me on my 5th birthday, my first bike, a vacation to Michigan I barely remembered. There was a note tucked into the last page. It read, "We didn't know how to love you the right way. We only knew how to control what we feared. We thought if we held on tight enough, you wouldn't fall. But we didn't realize we were the ones pushing you over the edge. We are sorry. For what it's worth now." There were no names, no signatures. But I knew. I didn't cry. I didn't burn it. I didn't even call them. I just closed the box and put it on the top shelf of my closet. Some things aren't meant to be forgotten, but they don't have to be relived either. In the weeks that followed, I focused on building Signal Safe into something bigger. We got our first corporate grant. A team of 10 volunteers expanded into 30. We opened our first physical office in Chicago. I gave a TEDx talk. My story, once a source of shame and isolation, had become a platform, a movement. that couldn't be silenced. But the part that still stays with me the most? The messages from people who told me, because of you, I finally stood up for myself. That's what made every minute worth it. That was the real justice. It's strange how a life can split in two. There was the life I lived before I knew my parents had betrayed me, the version of myself who trusted blindly, who believed that love and control could coexist without harm. And then there was everything after. I didn't become someone new. I became more of who I truly was. Someone who questioned, who protected her boundaries, who refused to let silence become a sanctuary for abusers, even if they wore the face of family. In the months following the viral video, I learned more about power than I ever did in all my finance classes. Real power, I discovered, isn't loud. It doesn't dominate a room or silence others with fear. Real power is the ability to choose peace when you could demand war. It's walking into a room where people once whispered about you and holding your head higher anyway. It's letting your truth stand, even when others try to rewrite the ending. My parents never reached out again, not directly. I think they knew better. After the album arrived, I waited. For a call, a letter, a sign that maybe they were finally ready to talk like equals. But it never came. They had chosen silence as their last weapon, and I had chosen to not let it affect me anymore. I'd stopped checking on their situation. I no longer cared if their friends had turned away, if they were dealing with consequences in court or in private. My justice didn't depend on their suffering. It was built on my healing. Every time I woke up in my apartment, poured coffee in my own kitchen, sat down to work on something I created from scratch, I felt it. That quiet, defiant joy of being completely free. But I would be lying if I said there weren't scars. Sometimes, when I hear the buzz of a notification at night, my heart still jumps. Not from fear of surveillance, but from the memory of what it felt like to always be watched. Trust is no longer something I offer freely. I weigh it. I observe. I ask questions I never would have dared to ask before. I don't let people talk me out of my instincts anymore. That alone has saved me countless times. The organization, Signal Safe, had become more than I ever imagined. We developed workshops for schools across Illinois, partnered with tech developers to create parental control apps with transparent reporting for minors. We even launched a support line for digital abuse victims and survivors. The messages we got were often heartbreaking, but every single one reminded me that what I went through was not an isolated case. It was part of a bigger, quieter epidemic, one that needed exposure, one that needed stories like mine. Kayla moved to Chicago and started working as our outreach director. Neil and I grew even closer. He never tried to make me forget what happened. Instead, he helped me carry it. On days when I couldn't write or speak or face another message from someone in pain, he'd sit beside me saying nothing, just being present. And when I was ready, I'd keep going. We had this unspoken understanding. We were both building something from broken parts, and it didn't scare us. My work caught the attention of universities. I was invited to guest lecture at DePaul, then Northwestern. They didn't ask me for perfect credentials. They asked me for truth, for insight, for experience. I walked into those classrooms full of students barely younger than me and told them what no textbook ever could. I showed them the logs, the reports, the receipts, and most importantly, the journey out of it. I told them about identity theft that isn't just financial, but emotional. When someone steals your autonomy under the excuse of love, it rewrites the way you see yourself. It turns your decisions into danger, your independence into disobedience. I watched their faces change as I spoke. Some leaned forward, some looked down, tears welling up. A few approached me afterward, whispering that they thought they were the only ones. And I told them what I had told Maya, and so many others since. You're not crazy. You're not alone. And you're allowed to leave behind the people who can't love you without controlling you. It wasn't about turning the world against parents. It was about accountability, about reminding people that titles like mother or father do not come with immunity. Love must come with respect, or it's not love at all. The nonprofit received a grant from a national tech safety initiative. We hired staff, opened a second office in Indianapolis, and we began drafting legislation, A policy proposal for the state of Indiana to require explicit digital consent for any parental surveillance on adult dependents. It was the kind of initiative I never thought I'd be part of, but here I was, in rooms with lawmakers, using my voice not just for justice, but for change. The first time I stood at that podium in the State House, I looked out at a sea of suits and unfamiliar eyes, and for a moment, I saw my father's face. Not literally, but emotionally. The way he used to lecture me about responsibility, the way he always thought he knew best. And I realized something. I wasn't afraid of his voice anymore, because mine had grown stronger. I closed that speech with a line I hadn't planned. Let this be the last generation where privacy has to be stolen back from those who claimed they were protecting us. The bill didn't pass the first round, but it got attention, headlines, support from advocacy groups, and we kept pushing. I learned that real change is a marathon, not a sprint, and I was ready for every mile. Sometimes I still think of who I used to be, the girl who smiled too much when she was scared, who apologized for asking questions, who assumed that the people who raised her would always have her best interests at heart. But I don't mourn her. I honor her. She survived what no one saw coming. She fought in silence, with doubt crawling in her mind, and still she stood up. Still she chose truth. Still she believed that freedom was worth the fallout. Because it was. Because it always will be. One evening, as I wrapped up an online panel discussion on digital rights, I saw a message come through the nonprofit inbox. It was from a name I didn't recognize, but the message read simply, "I saw your video. I just installed Spyware on my daughter's phone last month. After watching, I uninstalled it. I talked to her instead. Thank you." I sat there for a long time, just staring at those words. And that was when I cried. Not out of pain, not out of regret, but out of the quiet, powerful knowledge that this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a ripple, and it was changing things. A year had passed since I uploaded the video that changed everything. A full year since I stood in front of my camera, trembling slightly but unwavering, and told the world my truth. A full year since I had said my parents' names out loud and peeled back every layer of silence they had built around my life. A full year of growth, challenge, rebuilding, and most of all, reclaiming. I was 25 now. The kind of 25 that felt older than it should. Not because of age, but because of experience. I had lived a lifetime in that space between betrayal and becoming. My mornings began with stillness now. Not fear. Not alerts on my phone, just peace. I'd wake up in my Chicago apartment with the sunlight pouring through the windows and feel, okay, safe, free. It never stopped amazing me how peace could feel like a revolution when you had lived without it for too long. Signal Safe had become more than just a nonprofit. It had become a symbol. We'd expanded our services to 4 cities, launched a scholarship program for survivors of digital abuse, and formed international partnerships with cybersecurity firms who now offered discounted protection packages to young adults in high-risk households. We even developed our own privacy education app, ClearSpace, which broke 100,000 downloads in the first month of release. We weren't just responding to a crisis anymore. We were getting ahead of it. I had become a name people whispered in hallways when abuse was suspected but couldn't yet be proven. I was the girl with the story, the one who didn't back down. There were days that weight felt heavy. I wasn't a therapist. I wasn't a savior. But I tried my best to show up for the people who wrote to me. I made time for their pain, for their questions, for their fear, because I remembered what it felt like to be alone with a truth no one else could see. Some of the messages were short. Some were pages long. Some just said thank you, but each one mattered. I found myself building a community not just of survivors, but of architects. People who were tearing down the harmful systems they had inherited and replacing them with something stronger, kinder, more respectful. Friends who had once asked, "Am I crazy?" now stood on stages telling their stories, holding workshops, leading support groups. That was the real ending of my story. Not vengeance, not justice in the way movies teach us to crave, but transformation, legacy, ripples. Neil and I moved in together 6 months ago. We were never loud about our relationship, never performative. What we had was quiet, steady, the kind of connection built on shared truth and earned trust. We had our scars, but we didn't flinch at each other's wounds. Some nights, when I sat up editing or answering messages from across the world, he'd slide a cup of tea onto my desk and say nothing at all, just place his hand on my shoulder and leave it there. That's how I knew it was real. Not because of big declarations, but because in every moment where I once would have been afraid, I now felt calm. We took a weekend trip to Bloomington not long ago. It was the first time I'd been back without it being tied to confrontation or grief. We walked through campus, stopped at the old coffee shop I used to work at, took photos in front of the student center. It felt like time had folded in on itself, like I could see that younger version of me walking past us with her backpack, trying so hard to hold everything together. I wanted to stop her, to tell her it would all be okay, that the people she loved would disappoint her, but it wouldn't destroy her, that the pain she was drowning in would become her power, that she wasn't as alone as she thought. But I didn't need to, because she made it through. She became me, and I was proud of her. On the last night of that trip, I received an email. I almost didn't open it. The subject line was blank, but the sender was familiar. Deborah Barrett. My mother. I clicked. The message was brief, almost cold in its structure, but I could tell she had labored over every word. Jocelyn, I don't expect a reply. I just wanted to say that I see what you've built. I watched your TEDx talk. I read the Tribune follow-up. I understand now, at least more than I did before. I don't know if we deserve forgiveness. I don't even know if we should ever ask for it. But I do know you deserved better. And I hope you continue building what you're building. You've become someone remarkable. I hope one day you'll allow yourself to feel that. Mom? I didn't cry. Not this time. I sat with the words, reread them, then closed the laptop and stepped outside to the small balcony. The wind was sharp against my face, but I liked it. It reminded me I was alive, whole, in control. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I would, but not now. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process, and it's mine to control, just like every other part of my life they once tried to own. As the months rolled on, I began speaking less about my personal story and more about the collective mission. I wanted the next generation of survivors to feel empowered to lead, to take the spotlight and shine their light on corners of darkness I'd never even seen. I didn't need to be the center. I just wanted to make sure the fire never died. So I mentored. I stepped back. I became a supporter. And in that stillness, I found new parts of myself I hadn't yet explored. I began writing a book, not a memoir, but a collection of stories, true accounts from those who had survived digital abuse, alongside practical advice, tech tools, and narratives of recovery. I titled it Unseen: Surviving the Digital Cage. It became a bestseller within a month. Schools started assigning it. Parents wrote to me thanking me for changing how they approached boundaries with their kids. That irony wasn't lost on me. I had become the voice of what my parents had refused to hear. That alone was enough. Today, I wake up without fear. I check my bank account without flinching. I sit in boardrooms and talk about trauma-informed tech design. I walk into university halls and teach courses on digital consent. I build. I love. I grow. And when people ask me if I've truly moved on from what happened, I say no, because I didn't move on. I moved forward. And that's so much more powerful, because moving on means leaving something behind. Moving forward means taking it with you, carrying the lessons, the pain, the wisdom, and building something stronger with it. That's what I did. That's what I'll always do. And if you're reading this, or hearing this, or feeling something stir in your chest because your story isn't so different from mine, then know this. You are not defined by the worst things someone did to you. You are not broken beyond repair. And you are never, ever alone. Because I made it through. And so can you. Have you ever had to stand up to your own family just to reclaim your freedom and dignity? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you found your strength. If my journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe to follow more powerful stories of healing and reclaiming self-worth. And if you know someone who feels stuck in silence, send them this video. Sometimes, the ones closest to us do the most damage, and the only way to heal is by taking our power back. Thank you for listening to my story. And always remember, You are not alone, and you have the right to protect your peace.